This is AV SuperFriends Off the Rails, an almost regularly scheduled open discussion on audio and video in higher education. We'll sound off about our most brilliant ideas, our dumbest mistakes, and everything in between. And because this conversation will almost certainly go off the rails at some point, we'll end up covering just about everything else. And now, the AV SuperFriends. For September 25th, 2020, it's the AV SuperFriends Off the Rails. On today's show, we'll discuss the changing relationship between trade shows and new products, take a look at AV's responsibility in supporting pedagogy, and dive into the mailbag to answer your questions. So I'm joined today by Justin, Larry, Jamie, and Mark, and we've got a laundry list of items to discuss today. And in fact, we were talking before the show about how much can we discuss and how much can we not discuss, because we just don't have time to get through it all. I do want to start off today with a little bit of news and things that are kind of sneaking out. This one's kind of related to a topic we discussed last week, is this idea of trade shows moving around. Are they going to be more regionally focused, and what does that look like? Are we breaking away from the traditional model, or are we going to go right back to it in 2 years? But there was an article this week in, it was an AV Interactive, or AV Magazine, sorry. Their AV Interactive is their website, based out of the UK. So it's got kind of a UK flavor and a European bent to it, but it's still legit as far as their general reaction here is they're getting pushback from manufacturers and industry reps saying that we use these massive trade shows as a great opportunity to announce new products, to get it out to a huge audience, so much so that a lot of their product development cycles actually have those big trade shows as targets. And if those trade shows either aren't happening or are moving to smaller regional events, or if they're happening almost at the same time, or if they have slightly different audiences, that's going to start to affect product development. And we may start to see large manufacturers come to trade shows that don't really seem like they're announcing anything, or maybe they don't go to trade shows as much anymore, or maybe they're there primarily for the training and education side, but they're not doing the standard thing of coming out and saying, here's 15 new things we have, and we want to show you all of them here at our booth at the trade show. So I think a lot of them rely on that, and I'm kind of curious what you guys think. Is this something we see changing as they try to move, everyone's going to try to do their own version of an online trade show, or are they just going to dump out a whole bunch of emails and try to do webinars, or where do you think this is going?
I think it's going to be another thing stolen from Apple. You remember when Apple, it was all based around Macworld, right? Years and years and years ago. It's been that long, right? And then Apple said, screw it, we're out. We're going to do our own thing. Why are we letting somebody else take our thunder? And they start having these big special events. They announce products on their own time. They advertise their own thing. And yet, Macworld still exists, and it still goes on. I don't think a lot of the manufacturers are big enough to do that all on their own. But let's just go back a few weeks ago. QSC tried to do that. So, hey, we got this new thing. It's coming up in 10 days, 15 days. Started producing videos, promos, trailers. They had all these things, and all of a sudden, bang, there it is. Was it super exciting? Not really. But they did the marketing work that it takes to do that, and I think it's a big deal, and it's not. I think the roadmap is there for any of these large companies to steal the ideas from Apple and go with it. I mean, that's how I look at it, and I don't know. I think some of it's a lot of whining.
I think a lot of it's going to be based on that manufacturer, right? We're going to have to go through one full cycle here on releases, and then they'll look at the data and say, okay, did we not make our targets because we lost out on that ability to launch during a trade show or not? And if some of them launch products and it's successful and they didn't need the trade show, I think that'll actually probably do more damage in the end to the shows, as they probably won't come back in their full capacity they used to, right? So it's, if it works and everybody does their own little thing and they have success and hey, they meet their targets, then that might be their normal from that point on.
And I'd much rather them take their time. I'm so tired of doing the trade show announcement, and it's coming soon in November, coming soon next February, coming soon in June. I'm tired of it, man. Just when it's ready to go, I want you to tell me, we got this brand new laser projector. It's awesome. I got a warehouse full of them. Bang, sell them tomorrow.
Yeah, I think take that budget and ship me one to test. When it comes out, just deploy them.
I spend about 5 to 6 hours on the show floor every year. And if I'm on the show floor, I'm not getting education or I'm not meeting people, which is the primary reason why I go. So the thing that QSC did was nice, 10, 15-minute video, you got what you needed, and then move on.
But the show floor is nice for those smaller companies. And if the big companies aren't driving it, it's going to be hard to find those one-off things that fill a need that you can't get anywhere else.
Well,
Larry, you raise an interesting point that if it's a big enough company, if it's a massive, it's a Sony, it's a Panasonic, it's a Crestron, they can probably afford to do their own thing and make it worthwhile and make that work. But you're right, those smaller companies, which often have the most interesting little things at the show, they really live and die by that. So it'd be interesting to see how that's going to affect the smaller companies who are able to leverage the larger companies' buying power, who are supporting these trade shows by creating these massive booths, but are able to get there on a folding table and you find some really cool stuff. Also, Jamie, real quick correction. So Macworld, Apple last participated in 2009. Macworld died 5 years later. So
was it that quick? I thought they still had it.
No, last official one was in 2014. They tried to do one in 2015, but they didn't have enough people buying in. So now, granted,
all right,
and I'm glad you brought up that analogy there, that parallel, because that was a show, a trade show and conference based around one manufacturer. So when they moved to do their own thing, then that's tougher to do. But
Cisco Live's doing well.
Well, and I was also going to bring up the fact that Extron, pulled from the big shows too.
And that was almost 10 years ago. Yeah.
Yeah. And now I know they do other things, but we also saw Harman, the Harman products, or Samsung, or whatever they're being called now.
Did they officially pull out, or did they just forget to show up?
No. Well, see, there's the thing is, like, they took this whole approach of, we're going to stick ourselves into the VIP rooms. And if you care, you'll come see us. If you don't, we're not buying 600 acres of prime real estate out on the floor. And it's just been interesting to see over the years. I think the shows will take a bigger hit than the manufacturers. I think the shows will still exist, and I think those smaller companies will still be there because their product cycle is not as aggressive as Crestron, right? But I think the big companies, the large ones that have all the money, I don't see how this should affect them too much. Make a good product, release the good product, promote your product, and let's get going. Because sometimes these shows are a little overbloated with stuff. And when are you lost in the noise? When is your new gadget lost in the noise of stuff? And I'll tell you, we've all been there, where we heard about this brand new DSP from some company that doesn't normally make DSPs. And we all go over there and went, yeah, you're not even close to these other guys. And you get knocked right there on the show floor in front of everybody. So I guess I'm kind of in the quit being a crybaby, you big money people.
Well, I know that there's a large control manufacturer that is talking about doing an RV tours around the country right now and taking stuff with them. And it kind of makes me think, some of the most successful kind of demos we've had here at our university has been in our sandbox, right? A manufacturer will come with whatever they're going to show us, and we set it up. And usually, like, the thing they're showing us ends up not being the popular thing that we're actually talking about. It's usually some other supporting cast character widget that shows up that ends up being of the most value. And it makes me think, kind of, is there a trend here where some of those smaller companies need to kind of hitch their wagon to some of these larger kind of, we'll call them like regional acts and national acts, like get onto the national act and kind of go be a part of that grassroots campaign, get on that RV show and go bring your widget and kind of, not to use that Harman model, but like try to pair up with some of these larger companies to try to get your small tool set out there and go do on-site testing, go play in people's sandboxes.
That is going on. Yeah, that's kind of going on right now with the Almo tour and maybe a few others that are popping up. I've seen some little companies with the Samsungs and all that.
But I think that, to me, like I said, in our sandbox, when we do a live shootout, like, we actually take it and we break things and we find out ways. We actually are giving them real-time feedback on how it fits into our ecosystem with our systems. And we can really judge it on, like, will this work for us or not? And then they get feedback and we get to test and break things.
Again, it's a little more challenging for the smaller schools, though, because these RV tours will go and hit the Oregon States, the bigger universities. For a school that might have one or two AV guys, they can send a person to Infocom, as an example, meet a lot of people, get a lot of contacts, make those connections, not only with the manufacturers, but with other universities, so they can get some of that shared knowledge.
We've been hosting those other universities at our school. So when we do a big demo like that, we reach out to some of the other institutions. Nice. We're not just like,
I was going to say, Larry, me and you're going to have to drive an hour or so.
Yeah, we'll just meet up somewhere and find a.
Well, I'll tell you, annoyingly, as close as, as large as IU is, we're close enough to Indianapolis that they won't come down here. They'll be like, no, drive up here. So it's aggravating. So I think you guys bring up some good points. It'll be interesting to see kind of how this plays out. The regional shows, certainly, I think we're going to see more of those, and those are generally successful, especially if they're able to draw pretty well regionally. I think that the larger shows certainly benefit from a much wider net. They cast a wider net to bring in subject matter experts for the education side, for the training, and then also for that networking. It's because you may be talking with someone who's running into the exact same issue or something that you just, if they have the perfect solution for you, but they're across the country, and now you've made a really good contact in the industry that's able to help you out, and you probably won't get that same level of interaction at these regional shows. So I guess we'll play the wait and see game on this and see how it plays out. I think from the standpoint of manufacturers, they may adjust their product roadmap, so they're not doing their big announcements only twice or 2 or 3 times a year, but maybe they kind of roll things out periodically, quarterly or monthly or something. I know they all want to do their big mini shows. Crestron did Crestron Next a couple of weeks ago, and that was, there was a good amount of content in there. But a lot of it was rehashing things they had discussed earlier at various events. So maybe that will become kind of the model moving forward. I guess all we can do at this point is wait and see, but it'll be interesting times.
I agree. I think that's probably what we're going to see.
All right. Well, to our topic of the day. So something that came up at kind of a call earlier, I guess it was earlier this week or last week. We were discussing this kind of idea of the marriage, or not the marriage, as that's the wrong term, the general relationship. It's not quite to marriage state yet, still an early relationship of AV and technology and pedagogy, and how those all kind of interact, and they all kind of have to work together, and they all play a part in creating a teaching environment, a successful modern teaching environment, both from the instructor standpoint, from the student standpoint, from the support staff and IT standpoint. All these things have to kind of work in concert, and no one really does that well. Oftentimes, if there's an issue, the finger pointing begins, and the responsibility of teaching falls under one office. The responsibility for technology falls under another office. The responsibility for the AV and the equipment in the space or wherever they're trying to use falls to somebody else. So that's a challenge. Mark, you had mentioned that you had a long, drawn-out meeting on this where it kind of was going in an interesting direction, and you had some kind of thoughts on this. And I do want to preface this. This is a huge discussion. This is going to take hours and hours and hours for us to hash out, but we're not going to make you listen to that right now. We're going to spread that out over the next couple of months. But this will be an ongoing topic we'll come back to.
22 pages of notes that I'm getting through today. I have a script that I'm going to read, Chris. We're getting through this entire topic. This is that crossroads conversation.
We're going to have a solution here in 5 minutes.
We will have a solution.
Me?
This is all
who's
done.
playing me in the script?
So Justin's playing you.
The part by Jamie will be played by Justin.
That's going to be hard. I'll try.
Yeah. So I would imagine this conversation is probably happening at virtually every single institution across the country right now. And as people returned and teaching started or didn't start, and fits and starts, however it went down, a lot of management groups are trying to spin up as much support as possible. But our traditional model of support is when something's broken or needs to be fixed, we fix it, right? And so you have lots of instructors who are in rooms and asking, well, how do I do this, right? And then they pick up the support phone or send a ticket in or however they do it. And then you have this massive team of support folks that are trying to find out what bucket this sits in. Is this a Zoom thing? Is it a WebEx thing? Is it a Teams thing? Is this a Kaltura thing? Is this a Canvas thing? Whose problem is it? And it's like, it's not really a problem as much as it is these instructors are asking for very solid functional models that are successful. And they didn't spend all summer thinking about this and writing their scripts and putting together all their instructional design pieces. But here they are in the classroom in a hybrid model or whatever it may be, whatever you want to call it for a brand. And they're asking, how do I do this the best way? And a lot of institutions say, well, that's videos, video cameras, and microphones. That's how you do it. But that doesn't answer the problem. It's not an AV problem. It's probably not a silver bullet AV solution for it either. And so I pose the question to our management group, where's the model? Who has the successful model of this? If it's an eCampus somewhere, or if it's somewhere across the country, who has it? Who has the framework that can be taken off the shelf and an instructor can then take it, apply the classroom to it and start filling it in to actually have a model of success? Because like I said, it's not a trouble ticket problem. And you can put it in somebody's queue, but no instructor wants to be handed a link to 4,000 how-to videos or have to read a book on how to do it. They want to actually see somebody doing this in real time and have success. And so I pose the question to our group, because we all kind of represent different sections of the country. What have you seen that may be successful? Maybe what have you seen that's not been successful? And I think it's a good conversation, and it's going to go on and on and on. But I'm asking everybody I can, instructional designers, AV technicians, IT people, like, what is the best way to move this conversation forward? Who needs to be at the table?
Yeah, and I think it was a really interesting topic when we approached this earlier, because I think we all are in, like you said, we're on the same boat and we're all approaching it differently. And I think what's unique for us as AV people is that, yes, it's microphones and it's computers and it's all stuff we deal with, right? And most of the time we've put it in higher ed. We've designed it, we've installed it, and we know how it works and the focal lengths and things. The instructional designers don't always know that stuff. And yet, like the links they put out, they said, well, this is the terrible way to put it, right? And yet, but it's the easiest. It's whatever Chromebook or laptop you have sitting on the table, looking straight up your nose, whatever that's going. And then they say, well, this is the wonderful way to do it. And my experience with some of the instructors is that, well, but look at them. They have like real green screens and lights and they have one of those fancy microphones like you see on TV. And I don't have any of that. I can't teach that way because I don't have that kind of money or expertise. Here we come, right? Because the computer people can't help because they use software. So that this holistic idea of we're the everyman for all these people and we have to link them all together. I ran into this week when I had to do a training on a brand new thing we set up to try to make it as easy as possible. Our goal is, 3 buttons, let's go, right? Max, 3 buttons. And so we got all the way through this. And I had some non-traditional faculty, they're retired. And they really struggled with the whole training as a whole. And I had to break it. They're like, I need to use it next Wednesday. And I don't know what I'm doing. And we had to break it all. I had to go back and break it all the way down. Well, what exactly are you trying to accomplish? Not what they can do. We get so focused on what our systems can do. How awesome are they? We have 700 ceiling mics and 52 cameras and it'll follow you all over the room. Great. But what's that instructor trying to do? And when it came down to it, all they wanted to do was hold a Zoom meeting and share their content with 2 screens, not just one, and have a camera that they could look into together, right? And it was really simple. And once we broke it down into what do you want, they grasped it, they were able to modify it, and they were ready to rock and roll. And I just think that's just a tiny example of where these tickets come in. Most of the time, the tickets aren't coming in because the camera's not working. It's not working the way they were hoping they wanted to do their class. And who teaches that? We try to have all these, part of the instructional design team, we have these meetings and we talk and we say, well, let's try to do this. And we were going to recommend that. And I'll tell you, Mark, you asked where the examples are. I haven't seen very many good ones. I see some awesome examples of people doing it great, but not everybody. I don't know. Have you seen the kindergarten teacher this last week or so? There's this viral video of this kindergarten teacher, right? And she's like on speed. She's all methed out. she's just a great teacher. And sometimes it's not fair to her. She's not. Please, somebody's going to say that I did that. But she's a great teacher. And she's engaging even on camera across Zoom. You can imagine what she's like in real person. Not everybody's that way. So how do we fit these people?
So the last time I actually watched one of my faculty teach was in early 2000s when I was in college, right? So how often do we actually see the instructors work? I don't do that often at all. If I could get a synopsis of how instructors teach, well, at least 80 to 90% of them, we could be more successful at our job. You know, breaking it down to a microscopic view here, we're putting in these Zoom rooms with 2 cameras and microphones and confidence displays and all that stuff. That's great. And I start asking questions like, well, do we know if the teacher switches cameras on the iPad at all in class? Because if they're not, then why are we doing this? So, going back to Jamie's point, we need to better understand how the instructors have been teaching, and then also figure out what changes are coming with the new ways of teaching. And then we got to meet everybody in the middle. And those teaching coaches, the CITO people, they're a big stakeholder in this too, but they have to understand what we do. Because I don't think hardly anybody understands what we do, even on our local campuses. They think we hang TVs and hang projectors, and that's about it. So, going back to Mark's point, I think this is a communication process problem that we're all trying to figure out right here in the middle of a pandemic, unfortunately.
It's really interesting. We have that Flex Space website that has all these examples of these hybrid and these kind of distance learning rooms. And on the whole website, there's not a section dedicated to this is how people are using these things awesomely.
Right.
Yeah. And I'm with you, Mark. I would love to find that because I'm tired of trying to teach people, but I'm not a teacher. So they're skeptical. They look down on me.
One of the things I learned when I went from the commercial integration side to working in higher ed is I didn't understand the use case as well as I thought I did. And so immediately when I first started at Butler years and years ago, I hooked up with an instructional designer and we started scheduling lunch and learns and training sessions and everything else. So I could get with the faculty and get with them, and we would train a system or a room, and I would be there to handle tech questions. But while I was there helping to train, I was absorbing information. I was finding out what the instructional designer was telling the faculty to do with the system, why she was telling them to do everything. And it really helped me understand that there's a lot more to a successful system than the technology I put in it. And ever since then, every university I've been to, I've made sure that I get those relationships going because that feedback loop is the only way we're going to improve the type of systems we put in.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's tons of communication in this, and there are lots of examples across the country where you have IT and AV departments that are maybe embedded with your centers for teaching and learning or whatever your university may have. And I think those relationships are really important now. I know in the past, those groups may be their own disparate kind of locations on campus or across campus. And historically, we've engaged with them. And we were surprised to find out some of the stuff that they were recommending to folks, right? And then, because they themselves may have not understood what was in a classroom from a hardware standpoint. And we'd seen them reinventing and coming up with solutions. And it's like, well, you guys are putting a lot of energy into this when you could have just used this instead, right? And so we've made up a lot of ground over the years, but I think that relationship's going to have to be even more in the forefront because nobody's going to do this alone, right? And so it's kind of best practices, and we're going to create some best practices in this process. But I think it's going to change a lot, right? We'll have different versions of spaces coming out of the other side of this, because right now we're kind of still in that kind of quantitative deployment, and here we are. Now how do we do this at a better quality? How do we do a higher quality version of this? And who needs to be at the table? And I hope to bring some people on this show to actually talk and speak around this, right? I think every one of us at the table right now could tell you how to build a classroom and do a telepresence room or a collaboration room and give you the schematics and show you exactly how to build it. But that doesn't mean we're qualified to drive it well. And I think therein lies the real question. It's like, who are the ones, are real rock star people out there that are the best users of the technology in the space and the time, right? Because it's time boxed. And if we're doing this thing that's in real time, who does it well, right? And it's a disruptor, just like everything that's going on. But I think there's opportunity there. Chris, I'd like to know like what IU has, because I know you guys have the Mosaic. You have all these different spaces, and I think you guys probably have some different versions of champions in these rooms that may or may not be great at it, and for better or worse. So what's going on over there in your neck of the woods?
Yeah, it's interesting that there really isn't a single group who handles a lot of that at IU. It's so large, and there's so many people spread across different campuses that there's a Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning who handles some of that. There's the Mosaic program, which is a deliberate, I don't know, Larry, what would you call it? A collaboration between technology and pedagogy, specifically with a big research side. Yeah, looking at space design specifically, construction side space design, and not just kind of like, can we move tables around, but like, how can we physically build a space to move teaching forward or to allow for some of these new ideas? I mean, Jamie, you mentioned this idea of these videos of someone teaching online, and that, you know, just with a lot of enthusiasm and a lot of connection with students, even if they're remote and tiny little postage stamp windows on the screen. How do you build a space for that person? I mean, how do you find something that would give them everything they would need and let them just go crazy in there? And that's one of the challenges. So Mosaic is starting to kind of branch out. It was initially focused on on a small number of very specialized spaces, and now it's going kind of a little wider and just kind of absorbing a lot of any sort of, I hate to phrase it this way, but any sort of non-traditional space. Any sort of active learning, things where students are flipped classroom, things where students aren't just sitting in a auditorium of chairs looking at somebody at the front of the room. How can they make that space work? So IU has a lot of these programs, but the thing is, they don't reach every single person out there who's teaching this way. And now, suddenly, in the last couple of months, everyone's had to change the way they may have been teaching. Well, not everyone. Some people may have just like stepped into this and been like, hey, this is great. I know exactly what I'm doing. No problem. And other people, instructors, are just having a devil of a time. And like Mark said, is this a Kaltura problem? Am I having trouble with Zoom? Is my microphone, I don't know what's going on here. And so it's a real challenge, and we don't have a good answer. So it's the sort of thing where it requires a lot of different groups to come together. And in fact, Larry, you were talking about that, like even going into research programs to see what's going to be a good fit and how can we better inform ourselves even as we do this just from our side. So, I mean, what's your thoughts?
Well, one thing I just wanted to point out is a lot of the times the faculty who are teaching these courses, they aren't experts at teaching. They're experts at their subject matter. And so, you have your College of Ed who are usually pretty cognizant of how they're teaching and how they're getting their message across. These other groups need assistance when we add variables such as HighFlex and every other active learning even. And so there needs to be that partnership between the department, learning technology, and the space and classroom designers, just to make the student experience worthwhile.
Yeah, I mean, even Chris, you know this, before you teach at Infocom, Avixa pushes you through a type of introductory to teaching type course. And every 3 or 4 years, they make you go back, and it's different person every time, but it's a professional type training on how to engage audiences.
Mm-hmm. I think right now, like, I'm clued back in on what Chris was saying, is that, how do we create spaces for the teachers to teach the way that they're comfortable? And there are some large manufacturers. There's one, there's a couple that are trying to do this, right? They're making these little studio spaces where to try to make the virtual environment more like a regular classroom. Now, there are pluses and minuses to that. I might have gone through a couple of demos and was a little underwhelmed by the service that they were trying to sell, but agreed with the concept, right? And it's something of how do we make it comfortable? How do we make them feel like they're in front of a real classroom? And that means standing up, right? Let's stand up. Let's not sit down and slouch over our computer and this little bitty crappy webcam. Let's just stand up. It's that simple, right? Let's put a camera and a monitor in an area where they can stand up and look at it direct on. And maybe we use a clip-on mic instead of some other mic or their earbuds. You guys know this, now the audience does. My wife's an elementary school teacher, and I've got a ton of kids. So I'm like at every level of education here. And right now I'm getting, virtual education from every level. My wife's even in a master's program. And some of those classes have been atrocious. And they're the teachers, right? It's a master's in education, library science, right? These are educators. And it's not been good. The classes she's had have been horrendous. And these are teachers, right? And so I've also been challenged individually of, great, we have the luxury, we're able to throw money sometimes at a problem, or our institutions are willing to throw money at it, or we already have these classrooms that cost more than most people's cars, right? So how do we recreate that in somebody's basement? And sometimes it's just those little tips and tricks and things that it's those send them at home kits and stuff. And that's where, as an AV designer, I know this stuff because it interests me, because it makes me a better professionally, right? Because I'm a higher ed AV person, and I also have a teacher for a wife who asks me questions all the time. But I know this stuff. But does everybody? Do all the higher ed AV people do this? Do all the integrators look this deeply into the marriage between the actual teaching and pedagogy and what we're putting in, and how to ultimately make the teacher comfortable so the students retain the most knowledge? And that's the curious question here.
Well, I think that's all so timely on it, because where we're going to go on this it's going to take so many different forms in this conversation, and I do want to kind of get into a little bit of maybe some of that best practices and some of the disruptors that are going on with some of these instructors. But let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll kind of unpack some of that and get some different perspectives on maybe the should and shouldn'ts and ways we would kind of say that you should make the best use of maybe some of these spaces, and give us a chance to unpack a little bit of that. So stick around. We have more to come. All right. Well, welcome back. We have survived the commercial break, and we are here. We kind of left off talking about what are some of the best practices we may have seen, or examples of the disruption and the ways that instructors in these new spaces may have to rethink about the way they deliver or not deliver, or just change their practices. I know here we've seen people that historically like to speak very softly, and we tell people, hey, you need to yell loud enough for those people at home to hear you. Right. So that's one example, is that you have to speak up. And it's a hard conversation to have with instructors sometimes, because they don't like being told how to do their job at all. And when we say, hey, you should do this, they take it as we're implying they're not good at something. And it's a really challenging conversation. But there's so many different facets of this to really break down. And how you speak, how you enunciate in a classroom, and how you slow down so people can hear, and the technology can actually capture you in this analog environment. But no, we're joined now with Rachel. I think you probably have some insight here as to kind of through the Avixa days and some of this training you've seen about what does it take to kind of offer people that chance, and what are some of the opportunities that people have in kind of training themselves to benefit in these new environments?
Well, I think that there is no replacement for empathy. That these faculty members, they do have expertise. They know what good pedagogy is. And in a real world environment, I believe and hope that they're doing it. but they are very uncomfortable using technological tools, and it becomes very easy to retreat into a shell of doing what they're comfortable doing online, because doing really solid interactive pedagogy that is active learning and student centered is very difficult to accomplish online. There are all sorts of barriers and inefficiencies that just aren't present in an in-person environment. And it's very easy to retreat into a lecture shell because that's easy to execute. But I think that what can help draw them out of the shell, you don't have to tell them that they should be doing active learning. You don't have to tell them that their instruction should be student-centered, because they know that. They already believe that. They're bought in on that idea. What is, I think, difficult to see or can take some convincing is that they can do it online, or, and this is a harder conversation, that they're not doing it online. And what will increase that empathy is, and I just don't know that there's really any substitute for this, experiencing it themselves from the student side. You know, as they're having to participate in more virtual faculty meetings, as they're having to participate in more professional development themselves in a virtual platform, they are experiencing the same pain that their students have experienced. They are experiencing that they don't have as much voice in meetings as maybe they used to. They are experiencing that perhaps their virtual conference sessions are not as useful to them as their in-person conference attendance used to be. So I would start there and start with a conversation about the experiences that they've had and what has worked about them and what has not worked about them, because that will build consensus and buy-in about what needs to be different. I think when in the early days of the pandemic and my old life of event planning, we understood that it was very hard to execute and scale the sort of interactive conversations that we wanted to have at our in-person show. And to a large extent, we kind of didn't do it because we didn't really have time to figure it out. Now that we've been through 6 months of virtual events, everyone is so exhausted of Zoom fatigue, and the case, the value proposition of doing the work to do that interactive, participant-centered design has been established. We now understand the worth. And I think that the more that faculty members experience bad online education, the easier it will be to convince them not to do bad online education.
Yeah, I don't know. So I don't know.
I love the response, Jamie. I love
I don't
it.
know about all that.
Look,
I don't know.
yeah, no. So I agree with that for the most part, right? So 90% of this is I agree with you. The 10% that I don't is that we know, and you know, through sitting through these things, is that one of the reasons it was so difficult to change was because some folks don't realize how abysmal of a teacher they are. Some of these folks, as Larry brought up earlier, they are experts in their field, especially in higher ed. K-12, right? They learned and they went to higher ed in order to become a teacher, right? So that's different. Higher ed, usually they came from some other profession, and now they're teachers. And they really didn't know how terrible they were until they were recorded.
So here's the way I see it. Yeah.
It's kind of showing their deficiencies, and they're not comfortable with it.
Simply put.
Yeah. That's a whole different thing. Like I'm talking about, the professors who are good, but the professors who don't know they're bad, the faculty members who don't know they're bad, this is going to be a real uncomfortable time for them, because they have to look in the face the fact that they're bad. And what will happen with them first is that they will go to a place of fear as they try to exert the same control over a virtual audience that they have over a lecture hall.
And then they blame the tech.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
It's an easy scapegoat, right?
I've been sitting here listening to Jamie and Rachel talk, and I've been, flashback into when I was first asked to be a teacher for Avixa, Infocom, whatever you want to call it. And the simplest way I can explain it is they trained me not to be boring in front of people, right? And so I'm an expert at my subject matter, and we all are experts at our subject matter, and we all have to learn, if we wanted to teach, not to be boring and make it interesting and be energetic those 3 days. And it takes a lot out of you, and it's a lot of work. So these instructors have to have buy-in to want to be better, to not be boring, even though we're not bashing, hey, you're not stupid. We're not telling you you're stupid. You just can't be boring.
So a lot of instructors that they operated and they never had the opportunity to actually have assessment of themselves, right?
Exactly.
They would give, go to a class, give a lecture, they move on. They never had somebody sitting there recording it from the back of the room and saying, hey, by the way, I can't hear you. And so they've never had any real-time feedback. So now everything being digitized in this world, that they're now having this first time like, wow, I look like that. I sound like that. Oh, my content looks like that. That's the first time they've ever seen it, right? This is the mirror that they've never had to look in before.
Well, I was nervous, and I think Avixa recorded me my first time teaching. I was like, you're not nervous.
We're finding it. We're finding it.
I've asked for it and I can't find it. So
well, I think one thing that Rachel brought up though was having the instructor, once they've experienced bad online learning, they become more open. And when we were rolling out our new classrooms and all that stuff, every instructor said, well, make sure the whiteboard or the chalkboard is in the camera shot. And it wasn't until I did the training video where I showed them what writing an equation on the whiteboard for the camera did versus writing it on the document camera and projecting that on the projector. It let them experience what the difference was. And yeah, that's an easy example, but there's something to actually living it and experiencing it to make things easier to buy into.
Well, it brings up that story when I wrote out those accounting equations on that whiteboard I've told multiple times in front of those teachers, and they walked out on me because they couldn't read their own equations from the back of the room because they wrote so small on the whiteboard. And I don't think they've ever even thought about it, and their excuse was, well, students aren't complaining. Well, because the ones that care are sitting up in the front, and the ones that are sitting in the back don't care.
Yeah, it's a whole different world when your furthest viewer is hundreds of miles away.
Yeah.
So let me ask a really kind of mean and awful question. Is it our job to make bad faculty members better, or is it our job to winnow bad faculty members out?
So I think that's the crux of this whole conversation that we're not going to solve today, right? It's that holistic approach. And one of the things I was saying earlier was comfort, right? When they're comfortable, what's the education system like? I mean, we've all been around somebody where one-on-one, they blow your mind because the information transfer is off the charts. But you put two people there and they clam up, and that's the end of it, right? It is an abysmal situation. And so, but we're in that where that question comes up every single day. It's not our job to make them better teachers, but it's our job to give them the tools so that they can be the best teacher they want to be. And if we don't give them the tool and we don't show them how to use the tool, or we don't help apply that tool to the way they want to operate, then are we deficient? Because we've thrown hundreds of thousands of dollars at this thing, but is it the way they operate?
I think,
and we have to find that. Yeah, we have to find that middle ground. And we're not experts in pedagogy, but we need to be. But do we? But
a lot of us, including faculty, including the CITL people, including all of us, have lost sight of who our customer is. It's the people sitting in the chair paying to listen to that teacher's content. Mm-hmm. So it's just like going to the movie theater. I bring this up all the time when I'm talking with faculty about designing classrooms. You walk into a movie theater and you have a 30-inch screen in the corner and the sound system sucks. Do you think that you're going to stay, or are you going to ask for your $30 to $100 back, or whatever it costs these days? You're going to walk out.
So you're going to my local movie theater then?
That's right. They're only in Kentucky. 30-inch screens, things like that. But I mean, that's a valid point. Is you put something as simple as a movie theater and run that example, And then these students are paying thousands and thousands of dollars, not $20, not $50 for this content. I mean, you better make it worth their while.
And that's where I think this is going to become a very interesting conversation over the long haul. Because, we've already discussed that we're not going to solve this problem today. And we hope to bring in people who are, some of those instructional designers, some of the teachers teaching teachers. What do they have to say? Maybe we can even find a couple of those teachers. So if you're out there and you know of somebody, this conversation is going to be ongoing because we're trying to find that balance. That's our job in higher ed AV, is to find that balance to make the teachers quality teachers for those students who are trying to fork over thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars to learn something.
Yeah, I think, like we said, this is going to be a great conversation to keep rolling forward on it, and everybody needs to stay tuned for this one because it's gonna keep going. It's gonna be on and on and on, and we'll probably have, I don't know, at least 1,000 shows up based on this before it's all said and done, and maybe we'll have some magic equation when we come out the other end of it that you can apply to whatever it is you're looking at. But we'll take another quick break here, and then when we come back, we'll dig into that mailbag. So see you on the other side.
Do you have a question for the AV Super Friends, a topic to suggest, or were we just really, really wrong on something and you'd like to give us a piece of your mind? Well, don't just yell at your computer. Send us an email and we'll actually read it. Mailbag@avsuperfriends.com. We're always looking for good ideas to steal, discuss openly. And if your message is just full of great stuff, we might just invite you on the show. Mailbag@avsuperfriends.com. And welcome back. So, now's the time on the show, and we like to respond to your questions because that's where we get a lot of our ideas. So today's question comes from our AV Super Friends after party that we held at InfoComm 2020. We're still mining that massive, massive thing. That was almost, 2.5 hours and 150 some people. So there was a lot of content there. So this question was asked, and it's one we've been discussing off and on for the past couple of weeks. I think it's fantastic. Have any universities talked about allowing only professors on campus to teach in classrooms in order to offer a higher quality experience than teaching from home? So allowing someone to come in and use the better equipment and the better network and the better acoustics in the space and having support staff nearby to create content, but all the students are going to be remote. So Justin, you and I were talking about this. What's your thoughts?
So I brought this up to some of our internal people, asking questions about, when all this pandemic stuff hit, how do we see this playing out on our campus? And this was one of those situations. And we didn't really hear about anything, no talks about it up until a couple of weeks ago that we found out. I was looking at the Zoom dashboard that we manage and noticed that we had a Zoom room in the College of Business active, but also signed in. The teacher was also signed in to another computer in the adjacent classroom. And I didn't know that was the fact. I thought the instructor actually signed in to the instructor computer and the Zoom computer doing some kind of wormhole Zoom thing in the same room, but that wasn't the case. And so come to find out, this instructor didn't feel safe being in front of students. So the students are actually spreading out in other classrooms, and the instructor is teaching from the classroom next to all the students. So I thought that was interesting. I don't know how much of that is exactly going on. It's hard to pick up some of those metrics. Our dance studio theater people, they wanted to do the same thing. The unfortunate thing with that setup was the main thing was to get wire data in the space, but because it's such an old building, it was going to cost $2,000 to $3,000 to get data in there. So they ended up moving to the Student Athletic Center to teach. So that's kind of our story about faculty using the resources in the room by themselves and students either being remote or in other classrooms on campus, which I think is working out well because they are still doing it.
Yeah, I think for ourselves out here on the West Coast side of it, that was our original assumption. Like we thought going into this and pre-lockdown, we converted one whole building because it was the highest density of standard classrooms. And Chris, you were involved when you were out here, the Strand Ag building. We had 22 classrooms that were all exactly the same. And pre-lockdown, we said, we're probably going to move to an environment where the students are not going to be here, but instructors are going to be here because we look at who are the mandatory employees to make the university happen. Well, theoretically, the instructors would be essential staff, right? So they could qualify to be on campus and still use the space. So our first pivot was to actually treat that entire building so that only instructors would be in the room. And we did 22 rooms, and that was kind of where we came up with our model to kind of deploy through the summer. And then as time went on, that concept actually fell to the wayside, right? It was like, no, we're not going to have just instructors here. If we're coming back, we're going to have students and a mix of it. And then at the 11th hour, it became a reality like, you know what? Based on the feedback from the students, it'd be a better quality and also feedback from instructors that, hey, having access to tool sets that I don't have at my dining room table would be beneficial, right? And overwhelmingly, they all said, I need a whiteboard or I need a document camera, right? So, and they wanted to be in an environment they were comfortable in. They had a lot of anxiety being at home and speaking to students remotely from their living room or from their offices or whatever, and they made do, and it was good. But when I started looking at some of the feedback from the students, it was very clear that the students wanted them to be in a higher quality environment. And so right before they opened, it kind of got put in there like, hey, and those instructors who want to request a space on campus that has been treated for distance learning and collaboration, we do have a method in which you can reserve a room. And then it became more of a logistics of kind of cleanliness and sanitation, but that was pretty easily managed from the facilities group. We won't just allow people to just walk in and go. It's scheduled. We have to know where they are for security pieces and all that. But it is an option. And I think it's been beneficial for the instructors to not have to kind of recreate these pieces when the university has spent lots of resources to make this work for them already.
We followed kind of a similar model at IU where that was certainly one of the options was let's prepare some spaces and identify them in a couple of different buildings or in a couple of different campuses of these have the appropriate type of equipment you might want to teach remotely, even though the students may not be there. We weren't sure how much of that there was going to be, and what we ended up doing was identifying a couple of spaces that had that, but also had nearby support staff. So if someone had an issue, there's somebody there either in the building or, just that the support was available. Because as to your earlier point, I mean, setting this up in your dining room table makes the commute great, but it may not be a great experience if someone's kind of used to going in and performing in front of a class. They're not going to have that same mindset potentially. So we actually found that those numbers were lower than we had thought. That there are some who are teaching in an empty classroom because that's where all their stuff is, and they can come and still use their office and all that. But there's not a lot of that going on. I think it is. We're seeing it similar reasons though, because they know this stuff is going to work. If it doesn't work, there's somebody I can call. I know. Network is not going to be a problem, or the computer's not going to do weird updates. I know I'm using some other things that are normally outside of my control, and more importantly, it's somebody else's problem if there is an issue. So those are generally going to be more reliable. So I think we certainly will see that. I'm working with some departments on campus who want to build purpose-built spaces like this, and Mark and I have been in conversations about this for a while. This started even prior to COVID, but this idea of a faculty teaching or a faculty teaching only, is that the right term? A faculty teaching only space, a small space where you have effectively the gear that would be in the front of a teaching space, but nothing else. I think we're all going to start seeing those propagate. From an AV design standpoint, it's great. It's easy. Just do what you normally do and don't have to worry about the other, 4,000 square feet of this classroom. You're just worrying about the front half. So it's an interesting model. We'll see if people continue to use it long term, if it's something that really becomes a hit. But I think it is more common than you think, but not used as heavily as we thought it might be yet. So we'll see.
Yeah, that actually brings up something interesting that just reminded me. 2 or 3 years ago, we built a front half of the classroom, and the instructors, and we met with them like, okay, you got to explain what you're talking about here, right? They took us over. We want this lectern. We want this exact computer and this touch panel experience and a display in the front of the room because our teachers are going to start practicing in here. Oh, that's a pretty good idea. I just remember, I'm going to go back and see if they're using that, maybe collect some metrics.
I think from a just raw quality of a product standpoint, I think a lot of instructors started doing more lecture capture, right, with being at home and offering that. And they realize that if I'm putting this on my learning platform and I'm going to have this, I'd rather this be in a treated space and it not be in my bedroom or office or dining room table. And that if I'm going to do this, I might as well try to put my best foot forward so I can reuse this over and over. And I think there's a comfort level and it's more natural in the front of an actual room versus just wherever they may have an area to do it in their house. So I think just the quality is definitely higher for them.
All right. Well, I think we've run that one into the ground. So for those of you who are curious if that's something going on, yes, but to a limited extent. So build the front of your rooms as you normally would and just ignore all the seating and classroom microphones. Well, we've managed to ruin yet another episode of AV Super Friends Off the Rails. You can contact us with questions, topic ideas, or general complaints at mailbag@avsuperfriends.com. If you complain loud enough, we might just invite you on the show.
Nice work, everyone. Sharp broadcast. Really good. Everyone on the floor as well. Really a lot of hustle. I liked it.
The opinions expressed by the AV Super Friends are solely those of the individuals and do not represent their respective institutions, organizations, companies, or clients.